So this is CJ Baker, and this is episode 21 of the ongoing history of protest music, companion podcast to the website ongoing history of protestsongs.com. So today my special guest is activist, journalist, and rapper, among many other things, Awkword, who recently recorded the song 10 Demands, and he helped co-found the 10 Demands for Justice initiative. I'd like to thank you for being here.
Thank you. This is very important to me, protest music. I think it's the soul of the revolution. MLK said something to that effect. Soul of the movement.
It definitely does. So, of course, we're doing this through Zoom, so we all social distancing. And how have you been making out with the pandemic?
Overall, pretty good. Most of the things we do nowadays can be done online. And when we go out, whether it's for some kind of conference that is done outside, or a protest, or going food shopping, we wear our masks. But it's pretty crazy that we've hit 1 million people worldwide who've lost their lives to this, and there's still countless people across this country who believe it's a hoax.
I know, it's mind-boggling to think about that.
Yeah.
It's good that you're at least taking steps to adapt, and it's good. So as we mentioned, you recently released the song 10 Demands with Jesse Jett. Mm-hmm. So what was the motivation behind that tune?
So back in May, we started kind of joining organically a group of about a dozen or so activists, some more active than others, some have come and gone. But the purpose overall was to address a couple major issues in society in this country that certainly intersect with other issues. But, we see these as being incredibly timely, the kind of thing that you can't wait to address. And as demonstrated by months of protests nonstop across the country, including every single state in this country, there are a lot of people that agree. And so those issues are police violence, mass incarceration, the criminalization of race and class, and the ways that, all of those things, barking dogs, the way that those things intersect in our society. And, since I've been doing music now for a couple decades, and I've been involved in justice, racial, social, criminal justice activism for just as long, it seemed to make sense to me to kind of combine those two things and use this 10 Demands song and video to spread awareness about what is going on in our country, as well as the steps we can take to address it. At 10 Demands, we are abolitionists. We believe in the abolition of police and prisons. And, in the beginning of this song, I address all of the issues, and toward the end of the song, I provide solutions. And the video just illustrates that.
I thought that's one thing that's effective about it, because I checked out the website, 10forjustice.com, and it's well laid out. But for those that maybe have a tough time processing information that way, I think the song is effective, kind of almost condensing that in musical form.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things that music does really well and has done for so long. As we said at the beginning of this conversation, there needs to be soul to a movement, and music is that. My songs over the past couple decades have been used in college classrooms, in high schools, in teen centers, and at protests, for unions, for freeing Mumia, at Occupy Wall Street, and this is the kind of thing that, also, it's like life imitates art, art imitates life. I actually begin this song with every city, every town, burn the precinct to the ground.
Yeah.
that's a protest chant that I've now incorporated into this song.
I think that's the thing that, especially because sometimes there's obviously a number of musicians that are involved in activism as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes we associate it as two different acts. With you, it seems to very much dissect. Your music
Yeah.
seems to be an extension of your activism.
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm probably most well known for my music, and there's really no separating the music from the activism. I've done a lot of songs over the years that were not explicitly political, but
Yeah.
I think every action, every breath I take is political. The clothes I choose to wear, the
Yeah.
way I talk, where I spend my money, what foods I eat. So if I'm writing a song about a relationship, it's still going to be coming from my perspective. So, in a way where, you might find a song that has some sexist elements to it.
Yeah.
You're not going to find that in my music, because even if I have those feelings then are followed up with, interesting, why am I having those feelings?
Yeah.
Is it fair of me to start thinking all women are bad because this woman hurt my feelings? So that's the kind of stuff in a song that is not overtly political you'll see.
Yeah.
And when it comes to politics or more overt stuff, I've touched on everything from rape culture to fracking, to unequal education. I've talked a lot about mass incarceration and police brutality. So when I was approached to get involved in 10 Demands, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And as I said, it really made sense to lay out this framework in a way that, as you put it, might be easier for some people who don't understand what is really going on in this country, and don't understand what abolition means.
So we mentioned that, like the 10 demands for justice, and I already mentioned like the website 10forjustice.com. Do you want to expand a bit more of the objective of
Sure.
what that initiative and what's involved with the 10 demands?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll first start by saying that, the video is on the website, and in the description of the video is the link to the song. All of the proceeds from the sale of the song are being split between Black Lives Matter and the Movement for Black Lives. However, having said that, the criminalization of certain society or of certain communities extends beyond African Americans. Indigenous peoples are also represented in the 10 demands, as are brown people and as are all poor people. In our country, it's very clear that 1 in 3 Black boys born today is going to end up incarcerated. Black people are 600% more likely to be killed by a police officer. However, it's not just that. We have 2.5 million people incarcerated in this country, and 7 out of 10 of the people in jail have never even been convicted of a crime. We have entire poor communities who are criminalized and arrested for doing things that they're forced to do as a result of poverty. So what abolition entails is not just getting rid of police and prisons overnight. It essentially starts with what has become somewhat of a popular battle cry these days, which is a really great step in the right direction, and that's defunding police. Only it's not enough to just decrease by 5%. It's not enough to do what they did in New York, which was not defund at all, but simply move resources from the police budget to the school budget and continue to militarize public schools. What you need to do is reallocate those resources that are being taken from the police departments and put them in other places. So the 10 demands for justice break down a number of areas that need to be addressed right away, as well as provide this vision for an alternative society, where in place of, for example, patrols of targeted racialized communities, we are replacing them with peacekeepers and wellness checks.
Yeah.
Instead of mass arresting people, we're decriminalizing poverty, we're decriminalizing the sex trade, we're legalizing marijuana, we're ending cash bail so that these 7 out of 10 people who are not necessarily guilty are not rotting away, in jails just waiting to go to trial. It includes ending the death penalty. It includes, it includes, what was the other thing that I was thinking of? Well, I mean, one thing that we see all the time now during these protests is that we are protesting police violence and they're responding with more violence. So one entire demand is dedicated to ending all strategic counter-protest violence. And we consider unwarranted arrests and dispersals to be violence. So within each demand on the website, you see a very explicit, drawn-out explanation of what we mean for each demand. So for that one, that includes, ending all arrests of protesters. It includes freeing all of the protesters who are incarcerated and expunging, their records. And it includes removing the right for police officers to disperse crowds. These are people who are legally, coming to a public space. It is written into our Constitution. The violence begins when police start beating people and arresting them, for example, for holding a register to vote sign, like what happened the other night in Portland. And we also, include, as part of this, solutions, as I said. So, we're not saying remove police and just let people run wild. We provide a framework for what the alternative would be. And we also provide justification for why this is a better solution. Police themselves are, not just during protests, but every day, a significant cause of the violence in this country. Over 40% admit to abusing their spouses. 1/3 of stranger murders in this country are committed by cops. And it has been proven by significant amounts of research that irrespective of who you were prior to an interaction with a police officer, interacting with the police officer predicts future criminal activity. So if you combine that with the fact that we have immense amounts of poverty and inequality, we have underfunded schools, we have, luxurious rehab facilities for rich people, but nothing to treat mental illness or drug addiction for people who can't afford it. We don't have health care for all. The trillions of dollars that go into police departments would go into funding these things. So in addition, we would create a new system of transformative reparative justice. We would incorporate education. We would incorporate rehabilitation. We would incorporate violence prevention. And if a crime still happens, because of course it will happen, it's not going to completely negate crime. But once we've limited what is considered a crime, once we've equalized the playing field, whatever crimes are committed, people will be held responsible as human beings. It requires thinking outside the prison box, rethinking the concept of crime and punishment and of revenge. It means fixing this is the problem, fixing the people who have perpetrated the crime, who in the vast majority of cases have been victims themselves, and helping the people who are the victims of the crimes. So that through reparative justice, through taking steps to right your wrongs, everyone is improved. The entire situation is transformed, and the society as a whole is transformed.
And I think that's the thing, 'cause I know sometimes when people hear the word abolition, initially think it's some kind of wild, radical idea. That's why I like how it's logically presented on the website as a series of steps. So as you mentioned, it's just not a matter of wake up in the morning and there's absolutely no police and all the
Yeah.
criminals are free to go. And
Right.
there's a
You know,
series of steps there.
exactly. People assume that it is this overnight process, and you'd have to be crazy to think that we in our society today, which is basically on the brink of a full-on race war, where cops are actually coordinating with Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer while beating anti-racists, we could possibly just open up the prisons and jails and get rid of the cops. You know, a ton needs to be done to set this up. And as I said, defunding is the first step. So as we're defunding, we're creating these other mechanisms so that over time, as we slowly but surely defund the police budgets to zero and the police officer salaries to zero, we have set up all these other institutions that are non-carceral that can replace what is there now. You know, and so we believe that, you know, a lot of this can be done on the local level. A lot of this can be done on the state level. So, you know, in addition to putting out this song, you know, that is aiming to get donations for leading Black organizations, but also spread the message. We have distributed flyers to protesters in this country. And we're collecting email addresses for leaders at all stages of government so we can put these demands in front of them. You know, not just the 10 demands themselves, but you know, the website, you know, essentially repurposing the website so that they can see what each demand entails. And also what we envision as the alternative. Tons of work has been done for decades by people like Angela Davis and Miriam Kaba, and more recently, Dereka Purnell. As always, you know, Black women are taking the lead and getting little of the credit. You know, it made sense within our small organization. We're one of like 50 abolitionist organizations in the country. It made sense for us to have me kind of be a vocal spokesperson, because as a public figure and musician, I've been doing this for years. We weren't going to ask someone who doesn't rap to make a rap song.
That makes sense.
You know, right? But however, you know, I'm actually the only person who, and I'm a Jew, but I'm the only white person in the group at all. And so, you know, I have, in a sense, you know, based a lot of what my knowledge is on personal experience as a white person, but, you know, also, or someone who passes as white, and, you know, what I've read, but the input of Cheyenne, who's an indigenous woman, the input of Patrona, who's a Black woman, has been absolutely critical. You know, they are living this every single day. Their family members are living this every day, and it's life and death. Now, I feel it as strongly as anyone could, but I don't live it, you know? And that's why it was so important for us to base our knowledge and research on the Black women who have preceded us, but also the ones in my group who are experiencing it right now.
Yep, that's definitely important there. So it definitely, like we mentioned, website, so it's definitely worthwhile to check out, because it could be those that I think just about everyone agrees that the system needs to be fixed. But if there's questions of how to do it, or when people see protests, they say, okay, I can appreciate the protest. What steps do they want? Like sometimes they just think that it's just a loose collective of people protesting, and but they're not demanding any changes, but this clearly outlines what the demands are.
Right. That's why we wanted it, you know, in the hands of protesters. That's why, you know, what they've been doing in Seattle has been more effective and super important in, like, you know, leading the way. You know, having concrete demands really makes a difference. And while you're out on the streets protesting, you also are at board meetings and putting those demands in front of the city council. You know, and then you're also voting for progressive candidates, you know, like Jason Call in Washington, who, not only support the initiative. Jason, for example, not only endorsed 10 demands, but made it his platform for criminal justice. Trying to, electing Cori Bush was a major victory. She's a Black Lives Matter activist. So we're trying to come at this from all the different angles and to be as organized as possible. And there's certainly small disagreements here and there within the activist circles and, outside of it. But I think you're right. People are wrong in saying the system is broken. The system is functioning beautifully. It's doing exactly what it was intended to do. What we need to do is dismantle a system that is unjust, right? We need to create a new system that will hopefully be as effective, but actually effective for everybody and not just for the rich, not just for white people, not just for straight men. And I think there's a lot of confusion, as you mentioned, the protests, with on the one hand, Trump saying Antifa is a terrorist organization. Meanwhile, the FBI is saying Antifa is not a thing at all. And Trump's own Department of Homeland Security people telling him that it's the right wing, alt-right fascists who are the greatest threat to our safety and democracy. But we, as we always have, we have a media that tells people what they want to tell them, not what's actually true. So the misinformation and disinformation is rampant. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of ignorance. And there's a lot of deep-seated racism, homophobia, sexism. And I thought it was really interesting. I saw a tweet yesterday from some right-wing person who said, one of Trump's old people yesterday, I guess, was threatening to kill himself, and he had a whole bunch of guns. And so the cops came, and he was talking to one cop peacefully, and then you watch the video, out of nowhere, a whole bunch of other cops come running in and tackle him. And this tweet was I can't believe this brutality. Does this only happen to Trump supporters? Now, the comedy of that, of course, is that the Trump supporters, it never happens to. They stormed Capitol buildings all over the country because they didn't want to wear masks to protect themselves from COVID, spit in the faces of cops with machine guns in their hands, and nothing happened. But someone else replied, maybe this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, of people on the right wanting to stop police brutality too. I kind of doubt it, but the more it happens, the more it's in your face, the more widespread the, position will be that it needs to end. The reason why mass incarceration doesn't bother so many people is because it's, the proportions of people, who are impacted. For your average middle-class white person, it doesn't matter. Right? It's not their family members who are getting arrested on petty charges and spending, because of mandatory minimums, decades in prison. When they get caught with weed, they get let go. Then, now that it's partly legal, they're making money off of it, while people are still locked up for decades for doing that, the very same thing. So it's really about teaching people the truth. And that's what this song is trying to do. Entertain, of course. For what it's worth, I think it's, my best song yet. I think it's the best poetry, the best, rhyme schemes, all of that when it comes to hip hop. I think it's a really quality song. And, I've had some people in the hip hop circles say the same, because you can't come across as preaching. No. And if you don't have any talent at all, no one's going to want to listen. So hopefully the song is good enough and entertaining enough where you want to listen to it. It bangs in the car and all that stuff. And meanwhile, you're like, oh shit, that's a crazy thing that I just heard. Let me look into that.
Yep. And it does work as a piece of art. Quite often, art is a reflection of the political situation too. So it does definitely have that impact there. So just the one other thing I wanted to mention that I noticed, with the 10 demands, the one demand that stood out, because sometimes people might think this is a separate demand from abolition, is you include reparations as well.
Yeah.
So why was that so important to include that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one of the things that that definitely differentiates us from a lot of the other lists of demands.
Yeah.
That came from the Black and Indigenous people in our organization, who were very clear that from their conversations, this was something that their communities,
Yeah.
that who they've spoken with, really prioritized. And so I guess it's not enough to just apologize and move on, especially if no changes are going to be made. It's not enough to just apologize and implement the changes. A lot has to be done, and different things for each of those communities, to equalize the playing field. The descendants of the African slaves have had generations of persecution since slavery. So they were brought here against their will, and then they had the chain gangs, and the black codes, or the slave codes, I mean. Then they had Jim Crow, and now we have new slaves with the prison industrial complex. For Indigenous people, I think it goes without saying, but like, we took their land, we raped and murdered them, and then we made these treaties that we didn't follow through on. So as part of the 10 demands with the reparations, it's a public apology, and it's also recognizing in perpetuity all of those treaties, those that were passed and those that weren't. And it's, actual reparations for Black Americans, for descendants of slaves as well. That's really the only way that, we're going to get to the point where economically, which is such a big part of this, we are considered close to equal, or have close to the same opportunities. Then when it comes to Indigenous people, there's also that, because this was their land first, and, they want sovereignty as well. And on their lands, those that are remaining, they deserve to be able to police, or, whatever words you want to use, but manage their own communities. Police is probably the opposite of the right word. Although, they, as a community, they feel differently about policing because of, the situation with rape and assault and kidnapping that is unique to, to their community. When it comes to Black people in this country, there are only 3, maybe it's 4 Black CEOs in this country. The difference in, I think, like, it's absurd, the inequity in hiring practices, in real estate practices, every possible way in this country that enables the inequality and injustice to continue. So something like reparations is one step in the right direction, but as we're trying to change so many aspects of this society, what goes along with that should also be the opposite of what Trump just declared was going to happen for government organizations, but diversity and inclusion efforts in all companies, because not only are people with African American sounding names not called for interviews, those that somehow get through the cracks and get hired, the vast majority experience some form of discrimination once they're in the workplace. So a lot has to be done to change all of the mechanisms in this society. And as an abolitionist, you kind of see it all as connected. our healthcare system, our economic system, environmental justice, educational justice, electoral justice.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that the vast majority of those votes that are not counted or prevented from happening, those are poor people. Those are people
Yeah.
of color. You know, it's just piled on. So we need to kind of unpile all of that stuff.
And I know here in Canada, our issues are slightly different. Even when you look at, like, for example, we have a terrible track record dealing with the Indigenous community. So those questions, quite often there's discussions about reconciliation, and that's something where a subject like reparations is a very important topic there as well. These are discussions that need to be had. And I think that's the thing. It's people might think that this is a uniquely US issue, but just about every country, whoever my listeners are listening to this, about every country are dealing with at least some aspects of these issues.
Yeah, certainly. I think, you know, what really differentiates the US is you know, the racial element.
Yeah.
You know, any country with capitalism has the same economic issues.
Yeah.
You know, any country that does not have free education and free healthcare is dealing with those issues. But you know, the violence in this country, the violence of police in particular, the mass incarceration, the racism, and the guns.
Yeah.
You know, that definitely makes the United States unique. And, you know, one of the things we've been doing in kind of as part of spreading our message is comparing the United States to other countries.
Yeah.
You know, how many police killings are there in Japan?
Yeah.
There are 3 a day in the United States. I think there was 1 or something last year in Japan, you know, so we're comparing ourselves not to so-called third world countries,
Yeah.
but the other leading countries, and it's a stark contrast.
Yeah, definitely. So we can go back to your music, because there's another album I wanted to specifically talk about. So this was a studio album you did in 2014 called Road View.
Yeah.
So this was definitely an ambitious 100% charity global hip hop project, which I know expanded 6 continents and 16 countries and took 5 years to complete.
Yeah.
So what was the motivation behind that album?
You know, at the time, one of the things that, I mean, honestly, it all started on MySpace. However,
Okay.
you know, in 2008 or 2009, and I was getting people asking me from all over the world for acapellas so they could create remixes.
Oh.
And it became clear to me just how global hip hop is.
Yep.
And the power of hip hop to unite us internationally as well as, you know, within this country. And so what I wanted to do was take my first solo album and kind of make it an homage to hip hop, and, you know, use it to spread awareness about issues that affect the hip hop community, give back to an organization that, you know, affects people in the communities that birthed hip hop, and also showcase the global nature of hip hop today. So it's a very unusual solo studio album in that there are very few songs where I appear by myself. You know, on a lot of the songs, I have other featured artists who are rapping. But as you mentioned, you know, there's 6 continents and 16 countries involved, and that's all through the production. So I worked with tons of producers, you know, in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa, you know, to create this project. And as you can imagine, when you're working across continents with differing, you know, Wi-Fi networks and political situations, and, you know, like it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination. A lot of the songs, you know, I was able to record in person in the United States with American artists, you know, in the studio together. I recorded a few videos or shot a few videos for that album as well. One with the late, great Sean Price. And so there was some human interaction too, but
Yeah.
it really showed, is a great historical piece in evidencing this transitionary period where nowadays so much music, well, especially in the midst of COVID,
Yeah.
which we didn't expect at the time, of course, so much music is made online. So much music is made by people who are collaborating and have never even met in person and never will. So, it was, I don't know if it was one of the first, but it was certainly right in the thick of that beginning period where that was happening. And I did get to meet, a few people from the UK and from Africa when they came over to the United States. I did a show in Brooklyn with Hip Hop Pansula, who has unfortunately also passed away. During that time period, he was a megastar in South Africa. So yeah, I mean, it was really, it ended up being like, I don't know, like 45 songs. The first album I sold, through the traditional means, but also DJ Booth put it out through its website, and we sold it there. And then the second disc was just completely free. And yeah, I mean, it was quite an undertaking. And honestly, a lot has changed since then. I've put out far less music since then than I did in the period creating that, and at the time that I released it. Before 10 Demands, the last fully new song that I put out was Heather Heyer, aka can I curse on this thing?
Go ahead.
Okay. AKA Fuck Trump, that I put out a month or less than a month after Charlottesville and the Unite the Right rally. So nowadays, I'm very heavily involved in, activist strategy and organizing. I also do a lot of journalism. I have my own interview show on YouTube. I do a lot of writing and marketing stuff. Plus, I have 2 kids, 11 cats, and 2 dogs.
So that's a full-time job right there.
So I'm incredibly busy. And so I really, I hope that every song I put out now is, the highest level of quality that I personally have the ability to do, because it is really thought out. It's really time sensitive. It's really purposeful. Thankfully now I do finally have my own studio set up. When I moved out, when I left New York City after Worldview, my stuff was all in storage, and that certainly played a role too. So now that I have my own studio set up and so many crazy things are happening, I can't imagine another song won't happen soon. And I'm thinking of creating an EP possibly with Jesse Jett, who produced 10 Demands and sang the chorus. That relationship was so smooth, and I think he's an amazing singer. So that could be in the works as well. But certainly it's hard to juggle all of these different things, and also to understand, with my, who I am and what the very little kind of reach that I do have, what's the best way to prioritize my time? Am I more effective creating 10 Demands, or am I more effective creating a song about it? In this case, I did both. But, I'm constantly kind of juggling all of these different responsibilities.
And I guess that goes back to the music being an extension of the activism.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you produce a song, it would definitely serve a specific purpose.
Yep. You're absolutely right. But fittingly for a podcast and website that focuses on protest music, there's nothing that I value more than that contribution I've made. And there's nothing I enjoy more than creating this political art. So, unless I lose my voice permanently, I don't think I'll ever stop.
And even going back to the album Worldview, was one collaboration which stood out to me because he's definitely a legend in connection with political hip hop. Is you had a chance to collaborate with KOS1.
Yeah, I knew
So
you were
what
going
was
to
it
say that.
like working
Yeah.
with him? Was that kind of an in-person, or was that
Unfortunately,
more
no.
through online?
Yeah, that one was not in person, unfortunately. And also it's not one of my favorite songs.
Yeah,
It's an honor to be able to work with someone like that. It's
yeah,
an honor to have had Chuck D co-sign my music and play my stuff on his radio station.
yeah,
Because certainly I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them.
yeah,
Hip hop and activism saved my life.
yeah,
I grew up in a really rich conservative town that was very racist and anti-Semitic. And, I was working class. I come from a working class Jewish leftist family. I experienced a ton of anti-Semitism and then noticed that the very few people of color,
yeah,
the LGBTQ people, the physically handicapped people, or anyone who was not fit into this very
yeah,
small box experienced things even worse than I did. And I was incredibly violent growing up and angry. The anger, produced the violence.
yeah,
Thanks to my mom, being an influence as an activist and hip hop music being an outlet for me, I was able to take this anger and translate it into something positive. And as I, put the violence aside and put the other stuff in front, like that is how I ended up, not going to prison or not
yeah,
being killed. Because I was in a lot of situations that could have ended up in either of those cases. And, so certainly to be able to, to work with any of these artists that helped me grow up and figure out who I was going to be and a positive contributor to society, feels absolutely incredible. There's no question about that. But, as you kind of suggested, like being able to have worked with him in person, would have been a more visceral experience. So certainly some of the studio time I spent at Harry Fraud Studio, like working with Sean Price,
yeah,
he's an example of someone who was certainly not political in his music, but what he stood for was political because,
yeah,
he was kind of the antithesis of the shiny suit P. Diddy hip hop. Like rap music, like what he represented was the streets, and
yeah,
what he represented was like what, struggle
yeah,
and selling drugs to survive, and like, never leaving Brownsville. Working with him in person meant more to me probably than working with a legend in political hip hop, through the internet.
yeah. Music can definitely, as you mentioned, play that important outlet, can help us get through different situations. And I think that's something that I think basically any music fan, I think, has experienced that. And like even going back to my own youth with struggling with anger and depression issues, it wasn't for music, I don't know how to get through that.
Yep, 100%. And I was there too. There were years I shouldn't say years, but there were years where for extended periods of
Yeah,
time, I also couldn't get out of bed,
yeah,
and I would say like punk music and hip hop were there for me.
yeah. So before we conclude, is there anything else you want to plug or say?
No, I guess I would just say that, I really value the work that you do. Not enough people, shine a light on this kind of music, both with your website and your podcast, and the work you do for other sites, giving us an opportunity to be seen by more people, and spread our message further is greatly appreciated. So thank you. And then I would just say to those who are listening, it's 10forjustice.com. It's spelled out TENFOR justice.com. We also have, the usual social handles, and it's 10 demands, TENDEMANDS. And I am Awkward Rap on all the socials, AWKWORD RAP. If you want to ask me any questions about abolition, about my experiences making hip hop music, or if you want to help me fight Nazis, let me know.
That's something we talked about, people viewing Antifa as a terrorist organization, but the fact that being anti-fascist is considered radical.
I know, it's unreal. And the amount of hate that I get, I've been doxxed, I've been threatened, and then just the everyday deluge on Twitter. It's amazing how many people I've blocked. It's not worth engaging with them. You don't even know who they are because they're online, right? But it's pretty scary when you think about how many people there are in this country, and I'm sure in Canada as well. There are, collectives of anti-fascists in Canada as well, and they exist for a reason. It's really important that, not that we get approval from a fascist government, but that we fight despite that, because we are on the right side of history. We are the ones who care about justice and equality, and don't want people to be murdered by cops and by racists, and don't want people rotting in prison. So as hard as it gets, you just got to keep your head up and keep going. And, that's what I try to tell myself. It's hard. I try to separate my family life from what I do as Awkward, because I do fear for their safety. But we're prepared to fight back if we need to.
I guess that'd be the thing, is keep doing what we can do. Of course, that's different for each individual.
Yeah.
Yep. I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah. Don't get down on yourself either. Don't feel like you're not doing enough. What you can do is what you can do, and every little bit is appreciated.
Good. And that's a positive note to end our discussion.
Absolutely.
So I'll encourage our listeners to check out the 10forjustice.com and to check out the social media handles that you shared with us as well. And thank you again for taking the time to have this discussion with me.
Thank you, and be good. Be safe.